below Booktube.
Well, that was fun.
This is a trio you've wanted to see, isn't it? We're uploading this on my channel. Yes.
Yes.
Those of you who are new to the channel, this is Mark Richardson Reads. This is Jason. I'll leave a link to both their channels down below. And we are doing a shared Zoom call. Jason's all the way from Ireland, the west coast of Ireland.
It's phenomenal. It's pitch dark here now. It's just coming up to 9 o'clock. And but we're living in the world of Star Trek, guys.
We are.
In a few years, I'll be able to transport myself.
That would be.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. We've been watching a bit of Star Trek.
Quite a bit of Star Trek, yes.
I watched you guys. You had 2 videos up. I watched your first class, and you were watching Picard and a few things. I gave up on Picard.
Did
Why?
you?
Yeah. It could be something like what you were saying, Steve. The fact that I didn't have someone to kind of watch it with. Does that make sense?
That's a big deal, yeah. Another big fundamental shift for Star Trek fans is that Picard is not episodic. It's one huge story.
Yeah.
Star Trek fans aren't used to watching Star Trek like that.
No. Well, you're used to a self-contained story, start finish, with an overarching narrative, of course. I have a good friend who is a big Trekkie, way bigger than me, and I imagine if David is his name, if I sat down with him, I'd get a lot more from it. But I just wasn't really enjoying it that much. To be
What's
honest.
a whole lot to it, boy.
Yeah.
We haven't had much of a. There's a river. I just walked around on the river with my.
Who lectured everyone?
Yeah, the audio isn't great now, guys. I can't really hear you.
All right, is it better to lean in?
Yeah, it was just breaking up a bit. Maybe it's just the signal wasn't great. Yeah.
Perfect here.
Okay. Well, as long as you can hear me, that's all that matters.
Right. No, we hear you fine. We know that.
You're just here for the eye candy.
Yes.
It'd be the 21st targets playing about audio of what's happening here, considering how miraculous this is.
Yeah.
The audio. We have no. It's the bell here. I'm assuming there's a bell there.
The audio.
Weather.
Oh, the weather. Yeah, the weather is fine here. Nice. Jared and the kids went to the beach this afternoon. He was in the sea, boogie boarding. It was still warm enough to go into the water in late September. So, yeah,
nice.
Pretty good.
I have a weather app on my iPad. Keep an eye on you as well as.
In Ireland, what we do is we watch when there's hurricanes coming up in the Gulf of Mexico. We can set our clocks, and about 3 weeks after that, we'll get a storm because it tracks up the coast and comes across the Atlantic and hits us. So when you get big ones, we get a bit of forewarning. They rarely form on their own just in the Atlantic,
Right.
So we could put Steve in a rowboat in Miami, and eventually you would. Okay.
You have
washed up here the coast of the Shannon Estuary, and I pick them up, dry them off, and take them home.
There you go. You can stay for a couple of years, right?
I reckon he'd do it no problem at all.
You have the remnants of Paulette that are going to cross Newfoundland and hit you in a few days.
So anyway, Mark, tell me, how was it moving all those books reading?
It's tough because if you don't make a decision years before you do it, I mean, you're not constantly reading and thinking and making the best use of your space. But the other thing we ran into, I bought my bookshelves to fit the farmhouse.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, what a book makes sense there doesn't necessarily make sense. So we're with that.
And especially in an older house, the dimensions are not modern.
Right.
Windows different heights and different distances. The coding is different in an older house, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to find something for you. I was going through my documents. I have a big folder of 19th century documents, and I wanted to find something from 1830 to send you. And the closest I've got so far is this one is 1833.
Which is the house was built.
1833.
Yeah.
This is a long 3-page letter. It's a French document, and it's relating to the misbehavings of a civil servant when he was staying in a hotel in Paris.
These stories have all been around, right?
Oh yeah, I was thinking. I'm sure you've misbehaved once or twice when you've been away on official duty. And the other one is from 1828. So I haven't got 1830 yet, but I'm zooming in on it.
There you go. Yeah, this is. We're enjoying it. It's fun having Steve be able to walk around. I mean, he's got granite foundation walls that are just huge.
Fantastic.
There's a large summer kitchen.
Yeah.
And with the fireplace that's half the size of the building type thing downstairs. And we keep finding things. You'll see in the woodwork that there was a door there once. You know, that thing. So,
and while I think of it, Steve, I have something for you as well. Because I pay attention. I have.
Oh, look at that. That's the very thing I was talking about.
Isn't that great?
And it's got all the acetates in there. Look, there's how it is now. That's how it was back in the day. So I'll put this in your growing pile of stuff for Hyde Cottage. And I'll just pick up the next time in Rome.
Why would you have 1833? Where would you even find why would you want? It's not right. The civil servant isn't Alfred Dreyfus. It's just a document. Where would you get such a thing?
I would buy them at auctions primarily. I would buy large lots at auctions of documents. So this folder here, this is just French 19th century. This is just one of a couple, and these are all documents I haven't gone through yet. So I would have thousands of documents. Here's 1823. This is an official printed. See there, Ministry of the King. This is an official decree, one of the royal decrees that were issued in documentation form and stuff like that.
So what would be the why a lot like? Would it be the hope that there's genuinely significant in it, or is that the idea that it's all significant?
In a way, it's all significant. You know, it's all interesting. It's all history. But you do find like very interesting documents. You do, like I would have found documents signed or initialed by Napoleon, for example, turn up all the time. I've had a dozen or more times where I've had signed material by Napoleon. A lot of times he just signed an N in the column, in the margin, when he was approving something, because he would have had at times 20 secretaries firing out letters for him, and they would write them up. He wouldn't write them physically in his own hand. Often he didn't even sign it in his own hand. It was what's called a secretarial signature. But to approve it, he would do a quick like N in the corner, and if you recognise the N, you know it's Napoleon himself. You know.
I do that at work now. I do that at work now. I'll do a date and I'll code in where the bill's going to be paid, and I just have my initials.
Just add your initials. That's it. Yeah.
I'm just not going to write your whole name out when you file. You know, the bills are piled up. They know what it is. It looks like it's a document, and then
it's always been that way. And like I found very interesting. I find them interesting documents, and all of these I just keep for myself. Ephemera. I collect ephemera.
So, what is the tipping point that decides you whether or not you'll keep it yourself or try to? What would you do with it? Would you? You get something like that, and you think immediately, I know who would want this. Who would pay more for it than I?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it just makes sense to get it to a collector who really wants it. None of us own any of this stuff. I don't have books behind me for a change. There's a few paperbacks, but none of us really own any of these books or documents or bits. We only look after them while we have them while we're alive. And as soon as I'm gone, everything in this house will go. At some stage. So
I think because the house, I start seeing how many families have lived here, how many generations.
yeah.
When we're gone, somebody else will move in.
Yeah. That's
the same way.
It's the same. It's the same with books. We're really only. I don't care if you're a book collector or a book dealer or whether they're antiquarian books. You're only curating them for a little while. You're only custodian for a while. Even great libraries rise and fall. Books now that are in the Huntington Library or in the Grolier Club in New York or in the Boston Athenaeum, who knows in 200 years where they'll be? Or
that's
50.
Right. I love books.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the moltenly sexy 28-year-old, I'm wondering if boots are always this morbid. Why did this conversation get this way? We're all passing through here. We're mere grass in the fire.
It's the pandemic. It's the pandemic is in the air. Yeah. But owning books has to be, for me, having books that I want to have, one of the more joyful experiences. Like you guys were saying when you were on your haul there recently, like finding even one book on a day's hunt that you really want, that you're really interested in. That's a phenomenal feeling. People who don't have that, I don't think they understand just how good that feels to find that one book where you go, oh. And I was thinking, actually, if the three of us walked into a shop together, would we pick the same books? Where's the Venn diagram of our interests overlap?
Yeah.
Some of them we would.
Yeah. But I go three different directions and not see each other. That happens someday.
Yeah. But I think we'd all understand why the other person chose that book.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
And then Jason would be there, and you and I would have no idea what we were looking at.
Any place we were thinking that in the place where we went yesterday, we were wondering. We've gone to a couple of places in my visit here, and these places they're antique malls or charity emporiums or whatnot, but it's a bunch of junk. And you get the sense that most of the people who put it there on consignment don't know what it is.
But you can find treasures there.
The whole thing. We went to an antique mart yesterday.
Yeah.
What would Jason find that nobody knows?
You can find treasures, but I'll give you maybe something that would be counterintuitive from my experience. Some of the best finds I've had in bookshops are in well-run professional bookshops, because no one can be an expert in everything.
Right.
Complacency when they're doing it for a lot of years, they don't rate certain things, or their personal bias comes into it. So they might have I would have dealt in occult and esoteric books, so they might have a 19th century kind of fringe pamphlet on some little esoteric order or whatever, and they'll kind of go, oh, that's just some weird thing. And I come across that and I see it and I go, wow, I've never seen this before, and I know 100 people straight away who want it, and I have to be over the £50 or £100 they're looking for a nice little pamphlet or something like that. So
for every one of those, though, you go into that shop where they overvalue things that drives you.
Well, the thing where you go in and you see like a Bible from the 1850s, like nicely bound and stuff, but it's like $400 or something. You kind of go, why? Like it's all day long,
That personal preference thing where you go into a shop and you realize the shop owner loves history but doesn't even think about mysteries. So that they also could charge more money for it.
That's it.
One of my favorites like that.
If we were to go just on age, Steve would be the most valuable of the three of us, you know.
And we know I am. So how's that work? Yeah. So we were.
It's funny though how Booktube. I suppose not Booktube. Like when I'm out scouting now, like the other day I was up and I came across those Hornblower books and stuff, and I was thinking, in my head I'm thinking, oh, my friend Mark would love these, or Steve was just talking about these. It's funny how you're looking for yourself, but you're also looking for other bookish people, even though they're not agreeing with you. They're kind of with you in spirit. You're kind of like not being schmaltzy about it, but you see a book. Steve Donoghue would love that book, or I saw Steve hold that up last month or something, or and it's bizarre
because those people weren't in your 2 years ago.
Yeah,
they're weird. Remember the first time I did that when I was at the Brattle Bookshop bargain? I wasn't picking anything, but I was looking at the books different. That felt so strange. I was looking at the books and thinking, I just saw Olive talk about it. I don't want to buy it myself, but there was a community inside your head. It was weird to have it happen. Does it affect
that? It wouldn't make me buy a book unless I had heard, say, one of you guys talk about it and rate it, and then I'd kind of go, well, I'll try this, because if you think it's interesting, chances are I'll think it's kind of interesting. And I do have files here if you ever come. I have a Mark Richardson file, and I have a Steve Donoghue file, and we'll get them eventually, you know.
I just haven't. I could mail it to you. I could mail off my pile. I just haven't done it. That's all.
You can travel here. I mean,
I was putting stuff across because it doesn't matter now because we couldn't do it. I mean, I had provisionally booked flights to come over in May. A friend of mine works in Aer Lingus, and he was going to put me in actually one of the jump seats on the Boston flight. You know, the crew seats? Mm-hmm. And short, where I wanted to go, I'd pay a fare, but I could get in the jump seat. He's senior cabin crew at Aer Lingus. I won't say his name and get in trouble, but like 30 years. And I was all set to just bring one small bag of clothes and one suitcase full of books for you guys. And I was just going to sit there, handing out like candy, like candy to children, because I knew it was stuff that you go, okay, neither of you need any more books any more than I do, like a hole in the head. But they're the kind of books where you go, oh no, I actually do really want that. Yeah, you know that kind of thing.
We were talking the other day when we were driving, and we were talking about you saying, we need to go, and we were doing distances, trying to figure out how you would pick up, because I moved in Vermont a bit, so I'm different locations, so it changes roads. And we were talking about going down the Niantic.
The Niantic Book Barn.
Which is more than
5 buildings full of people. They don't know how many they have. They buy, I think the guy, the last time I was there, said they buy 60 bags, 60 every month, and just fill the bowls all over the place. But they don't know how many they have their own. They have one dog. They have a petting zoo with a goat in it. They have a koi pond.
But they have a lot of
books. There's a whole devoted to a building the size of this one, devoted to mysteries. Hardcover. We were thinking, I mean, Niantic is on the coast. You go there, and then you drive just a minute and you can look across to what nuclear power plant that's down there. I used to know the name. I don't know. There's a nuclear power plant just sitting there in the bay. But we were trying to calculate how you would make such a trip. How you couldn't join us, right? Because history has intervened.
With the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see myself getting to the States for years.
No, not for years.
I couldn't now anyway. You guys are not on our green list of travel. So we
Why is that?
But we have a green list where you can travel if it's necessary to travel,
Right.
and you wouldn't necessarily have to quarantine when you come back. But like Deirdre would have traveled to the States, to Oregon, and sometimes to Plano in Texas. The company she's with has corporate headquarters in both of those places, and they just no travel for the foreseeable future. Forget about it. And like I just wouldn't go because of it. I imagine I could mask up and take care of myself and do all the precautions that they do here. But it's the logistics and the quarantine when I come back and etc. It's just off the table.
It was a little easier for me than it would be for most people, because I usually write on my couch anyway. Quarantine wasn't hard for me to do. I think you may have seen on a video yesterday that I quarantined at Cottage for 2 weeks in order to come up here. That's what Vermont requires. And one person actually emailed me and said, "You're not doing any Brattle book hauls. I bet that's because." And why would you quarantine? I bet it's because you're going up to Vermont.
Well, and I Booktube for like the whole week because I haven't been feeling great, so I wasn't even watching videos, let alone making videos. So I kind of missed until you messaged me and said you were heading off to. And we were chatting on Boxer, and you said you were heading off to Vermont that day or whatever. But yeah, I'm very jealous.
The goal that I think that sort of half formed yesterday is if you can't with us to the book barn, then we'll go there in spirit with you. We'll have live technology, log it all. We just have to figure out the logistics of how to do it.
It's doable.
It's doable. It's a big thing.
Yeah. If you go there, I give you my permission to pick one book out each for me, and then you can pop that in the mail, and I'll be happy.
I can imagine. The book barn they deal in high volume. Ordinary by the 100,000, but in the main building, there are books, in plastic on the wall. There are books behind counters. There are books behind glass doors. I can't help but think that maybe one of those would be of interest. They probably get a ton of documents too.
The door I was at this week where I got those nice jacketed hardbacks, some of which are American editions because they come in from the States to here in containers.
Those Hornblowers.
And they're a mix between. It was a funny mix, those Hornblowers, because there's actually some first editions and then some book club editions. But they're just nice in the jackets anyway. I don't care about that when they're sitting on my shelf. I'm not too.
I love.
Yeah, they're great, the jackets. But that shop I was in, it's Charlie Burns in Galway. For anyone in Ireland who wants to go there, and Charlie has about 120,000 books on the shelves there. And like that, it turns over every time I go there. It's just huge turnover. It's always busy there. But I always find great stuff because there's 120,000 books. I probably look at about 40,000 of them when I'm there. I never stay less than like 3 or 4 hours. And I just go dum down the shelves like that, and I pull.
Galway's on my, always has been.
Yeah, well, your roots are in Galway, aren't they? Some of them.
Yeah.
Like a 40-minute drive from me here up the road. We're a bit like Vermont. Everything is just up the road.
But now in late September 2020, when you go to that shop in Galway, what pandemic precautions do they take?
Oh, they limit the amount of people inside. Mm-hmm. You got to wear a mask, obviously. You sanitize your hands going in. That you got to do that, and they have a one-way system. Now they have in theory a time limit, but I kind of would be. I'd be leaving a bit of money there, if you know what I mean. So I get maybe a little bit extra time going. But I would maybe have a break and go out and grab a coffee, and then come back as well. Because I could easily spend 3-4 hours in that one shop.
Wow,
sounds quite interesting. If you ever came here, it would be one of the first shops I would bring you to, because you would both find books that you would be interested in there, and very good value. Not like hyper. He has expensive books, but like a lot of them are very. they're not thrift shop prices, but they're not mega expensive kind of prices. Very reasonable. Price to sell, as we'd say,
That's what
I think, just to be Debbie Downer now for a minute, like the numbers in Ireland today have doubled from last week of new infections, and looks like they're set to double again next week. The capital city has gone into lockdown effectively for the next 3 weeks, so we're heading straight back into another national lockdown in the next couple of weeks.
I've been watching news. What is the reason, do you think, for this research? Did people just get lax?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. I think we've just come through a reasonably nice summer, so people have been out and about mixing at beaches and stuff like that. Complacency comes into it. The infection rate was higher among under 45s, which is interesting, I suppose. And school started 2 weeks ago. So I personally thought they should have just gone with another year of online. I get all the arguments about mental health, but we didn't get that. Yeah.
All three of them are online. We had a choice.
Yeah, it's great you have.
My oldest boy, Sam, first year of high school.
Yeah. And that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And so he's doing it.
No.
But we felt that he had to.
Yeah. The one thing here I've noticed that's mildly annoying is the rise of all these anti-mask, anti-vax, and they're wrapping it up in kind of nationalist politics. There's demonstrations, they're all carrying the Irish tricolour for some reason. Suddenly they're wrapping themselves in the flag because they're conflating nationalism with anti-vax with. And even here in Ireland now, we're getting that George Soros and these people are behind the media. It's wholesale imported and is actually being astroturfed by some American groups and some continental European groups who are agitating and paying in the background, particularly from Germany. It's coming from.
How is that being used by politicians? People that are using that to their benefit? Not just grassroots.
No, it's very much on the fringe here. It's very much a fringe activity, visibly in public. And our main political parties are fairly centrist, so we don't have too many extremes within the party. You might have one or two extremes, but it's not in the kind of political discourse, thankfully. But it's heading that way.
Well, it's on the fringes here too. Fringes include the White House. The White House is squarely on now.
And half the Senate.
I've never seen in 50 years, well, I suppose it would count 50 now, but I've never seen as much coverage in Ireland or in Europe of American politics as I have in the last 4 years, or 3.5, 4 years. It's just daily. We get it the same. The headlines here yesterday were about RBG, God rest her soul, and that within an hour, Mitch McConnell. I know all these names. I know all your guys' names. Mitch McConnell was turning up 360 on what he said for Garland's nomination last year, Obama, and Lindsey Graham was doing all the pirouetting and spinning, and now you've just got a few Republican senators who might, think. But I follow it closely because it's so saturated here with coverage. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I think my friends in Abu Dhabi say the same thing. That 5 years ago they barely knew anything about American politics, and now every story in every news cycle. And the explanation for it is easy because it's not. Thanks to the rapid nature of the American Republican Party, it's become this weird good evil story. I mean, the figures that you get in America some of them are just cartoony evil, and that makes very interesting reading. It'd be your own that order. if you've got a country in the middle of the pandemic holding closed door alleys, that is just cartoonishly. So you have a presidential candidate. Hey, go to one of those, get sick, and die, all in one news cycle.
Game, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, for years in Ireland,
Viable candidate, he died.
Yeah. For years in Ireland, U.S. presidents were only of interest to us if they had an Irish background and B, came to visit. So Obama came, well, we had great fun with the Obama, and he had his pint of Guinness. Ronald Reagan came. I saw him in Ballyporeen in County Tipperary back in the 80s, and he was feted and welcomed. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. If you were an American president that had some Irish background, you were welcomed. Famously, John F. Kennedy came. But Donald Trump he's got a golf course very near me, Doonbeg Golf Course out here in County Clare. So, yeah.
We do hear about that golf course.
Yeah. I remember Mike Pence found a good reason to somehow stop around and stay there for a week with like 200 Secret Service people on the way home or something. You know? But it's going to be interesting. I think I was fascinated by your guys' discussion where you were talking about the pandemics of the past.
Right.
And you were saying like how the Spanish flu didn't feature, say, like in Hemingway and stuff like that. I wonder what's going to come in the next 10 years of this, because we've got the rise of authoritarianism across the globe, not just in any one particular continent or country. And now we've got this perfect storm of a pandemic that needs a global response, a unified global response. How is it going to play out? I have no idea. It will be really interesting.
Yeah. Plus, nature. We have unprecedentedly enormous and dangerous fires in this. We now have a fire season in this country. 4 seasons on the calendar and fires.
Not just us. Remember Australia not too long ago.
Australia was burning to the ground. Right. And
the official response is you've got to rake your leaves.
Yes, you've got to rake your forest, otherwise it explodes.
You're right now, that's an urban dweller. Okay.
The President of the United States.
He comes from a city where you rake. If you decide to rake here, you just never stop.
10,000 acres there and decided the Rockies while they're at it. To avoid the bears.
Yes, oh my gosh.
Yes, he thought that you should rake. And today or yesterday, that America is going to put astronauts on the planet Mars.
Not Mars. Mars.
And his press people immediately tried to rescue the moment by saying, well, you know, he's reading off a teleprompter and there was a crowd and there was a lot of noise. And I want to say, doesn't the most basic autofill under those conditions render the word Mars? Who has ever even said the word Nars?
Well, he renamed the planet.
Yeah, he renamed it.
Let's get back to some books. So the Hornblower obviously caught my attention. When did you first read Hornblower?
Oh, did we glitch out?
Yeah, you glitched out. You're coming back there now, yeah.
Catch the question?
Okay. So when I was asking, of course, the Hornblower fascinated me. I was wondering, when you first read Hornblower, when did you first run into that?
Oh, I'd say my early 20s, so 30 years ago? I loved it. Loved the kind of sweep of it. Actually, it was one of the first maritime series I read. And I've read Patrick O'Brian, who I love a lot more, but I do love Horn. It's of its time, and the pacing is very different than Patrick O'Brian. But it's one of those kind of feature books from my reading growing up. Hornblower. It's just the name.
Yeah.
It sparks a lot of images, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's when I would have first done it. Yeah.
So did you
And
go through it?
Sorry.
Did you go right through the series once you found it?
I think I've read most of them. There might be one or two I didn't get to because again, this is pre-internet, and if I didn't come across them, I wouldn't have ordered them. But like I've certainly read all of Patrick O'Brien's series more than once. It's fabulous. It's funny. Yeah, it's I think we all. I find sometimes I talk about the books I'm reading on my channel. And it might appear that I'm reading very specific things and don't read other things. But I don't talk about every book I've ever read, or every series I've ever read, or every genre I've ever read. It's only reflecting what I'm reading now. And even then, I don't read as much as Steve, but I read a lot. So if I do a Friday reads, I might talk about 2 of the books I've read that week, but I don't mention the other 3 or 4, and I'm still old school when it comes to reviewing and rating books. I generally either like a book or I don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't physically analyze every single book I read and kind of go, well, from a post-colonial point of view, it worked on this level. I either like the book or I don't. I generally finish most books I start, and at the end of it, I'll go, that was good, or
I'm the same way.
You are killing me. You want me to be out of a job? I am just the opposite.
But that's your job to read like that. But me as a reader, primarily, it's just I either like the book or there's certain authors and genres I explore more deeply, like some of my favorites. But 80% of what I read, if it's fiction particularly, and that's a small amount of my overall reading is mainly non-fiction. It's either I like the story or I don't. It either engaged me or it didn't. I go no further than that, and that's why I don't do a lot of book reviews. I don't do book.
When you read a book about Crusade, you don't read like that.
Yeah, I would say that you bring an enormous critical
when you read a book about the Crusade history.
Oh, well, then I'm critical. I pre-read even when a new book comes out. I talked about this in the tag recently. If there's a new big work coming out on the Crusades, I'm in my shelves pre-reading 5 or 6 books.
I love that term. That is so great. Pre-reading.
So when I come to the new book, I kind of feel I'm ready to tear it apart if that needs to be done. And I do that. I'm very critical if it's something that has to go on my shelves. I'm very kind of. Sorry?
You get that book. You get the book of the Crusades. It's a brand new book.
Yeah.
It showed up at your house. You're ready to rock and roll. Where do you open first? What do you look at?
I look first at the bibliography.
We're all the same.
Yeah, we do that.
We start at the back.
Straight to the back. Yeah. I have a quick look at the notes, see how detailed they are. Then I'll often turn, believe it or not, to the illustrations to see if there's anything new. So I'm not seeing the same 10 photographs that I've seen in every other book on it. And then I'll go to the introduction. And those books I critically read. And if a book doesn't cut it for me, I won't keep it just because it's about the Crusades. If it's not good enough, it doesn't stay. It'll go back out again, I only want books I find interesting on it, just for space, nothing else. I always say my books have to pay their rent.
Well, they do.
They get an inch of shelf space. They got to pay that rent. The rent,
Pay their rent. You're about to do a whole lot of evictions. He's got a pile of boxes of books that are going.
He's like a slum landlord at this stage.
Some of those big books are paying double rent. Some of them are huge.
I think far fewer books than either of you do. I I don't think I have half of the number that you do.
I've cut down a lot this year. I got rid of a lot during the lockdown, believe it or not. I boxed up books, and when it was safe to get them out, I got rid of, I would say, easily 1,000, if not more, books.
Yeah, I got 9 boxes on the breezeway that I had Steve go through and say, hey, they're good books.
Yeah,
but they're just.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm trying to get down to one room. So you know the room I normally shoot in, the book room. The internet's terrible in there. That's why I'm not, because it's lined with books, so I get no signal. But I'm moving that into another kind of longer room, a bigger room that I'm taking one entire. It's got to be like 40 foot of wall that I'm going to shift. It kind of runs down one side of the house, and I want to get everything I have into that space.
Are you going to build?
No, I'm just going to use IKEA Billy cases because for my ceiling height they fit perfectly.
Oh, okay, I love them.
The Billy cases, and then I buy the extra add-on that goes on the top of them, and they fit perfectly with the ceilings I have in this house. And the dimensions are good because you can buy the kind of half cases to make up base and corner units and stuff. Yeah.
When this movie is done, books anywhere else in the house? They'll just be in that one room.
Just in this house. Is that what we're talking about?
Room.
Places.
But I have to ask, who is that saint behind you?
Oh, that's Benedict.
Of course, okay.
There we go. There he is. That's an icon of Saint Benedict there.
Those of you who might be joining the channel new, Jason is a big fan. they go way back. Oh, look at that.
Before you called, I was doing Vespers, so I'm very cleansed at the moment for talking to you.
Prepare for us.
Those of you who maybe are waiting on in my waiting list for Zoom calls, you do not do Vespers first. That's just Jason.
It's one of the weird things. I got a load of questions. I haven't got to them yet in the Q&A. It's one of the weird things I found on Booktube where people say, you're this guy who says prayers and is open about it and, goes on retreats and loves the monastic lifestyle. And yet you've got this huge library of occult books and books on arcane magic and stuff. And I think it throws a lot of people that can't make it doesn't work in their heads for some reason. It's perfectly normal to believe it.
Unfortunately, 21st century, where people aren't allowed to have money.
Yeah, you can have
someone like that with a multifaceted person, and they are bewildered. Well, I don't understand. X, you're not allowed to, why?
I saw that on Booktube when I first started. I made the error, I guess you could call it an error, of 3 straight videos on science. And then for 2 months, everybody thought that's all I read.
That's all you read. Yeah.
Well, it's not even.
Yeah.
But they podcast, and then 2 months later, you do a science fiction again, and they're like, "Well, I'm glad you're back here."
Yeah. I just find, say, for example, with the esoteric stuff or the occult, it's a wonderful, unusual lens to look at history. You think of all the great leaders, even throughout history, have always kept someone in their court back when they were court astrologers. Right up to Nancy Reagan, she used to consult an astrologer. Queen Elizabeth had Dr. John Dee, who then went off to serve in the courts of Europe. It's one of those, I use that term, these kind of side door histories. It's a way to look at a historical period through a kind of lens that isn't mainstream. And to me, it's different then and interesting because I've read all the big, not all, but I've read a lot of the big mainstream history. So now I like finding stuff that someone with a different or unorthodox point of view gives their recollections of the time. That's very interesting.
So what you would love about Vermont is that in the 1800s, lived electronic government.
Sorry, the what?
Masons were a party. They won Vermont. They were the government.
So Vermont.
No. But they had them. Well, Thomas Jefferson, right? I mean, Masons were our government forever, but Vermont, they actually were formally put up party members.
Fantastic. So, and of course, all this stuff helps to feed into all the conspiracy things, you know. The fact that kind of senior people have had mystics or magicians at their call or astrologers. It feeds into this whole Illuminati cabals at the head of society kind of, you know, it's and of course it's bonkers if you look at it in any bit critical kind of detail. You know, this was just the fashion at the time was to have, like, you had a jester, you had another guy who would throw a few bones and tell you, yeah, it's okay, Emperor, to stab your cousin to death, you know. You know, because who's going to tell him no, right?
We have the ultimate manifestation of that in America now with QAnon. Conspiracy theory built on nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Even little grains of things that may have been true or contestable, but things that are easily proven false. It wears ignorance as a pride. Yeah. It's not the source of argument. It's that easily in 1 second, demonstrably, factually prove wrong, and that just makes them happier. Now, if you think you can do that, you're probably.
I think too.
About a pizza place that doesn't have a basement. The whole of it began in the basement of a pizza place that doesn't have one. You couldn't come up with a better illustration of a crackpot conspiracy theory.
But I think that a lot of this stuff is people like to feel like they're in the know. You know, they like to feel like they have some kind of secret inside information. And it's their way of dealing with the pure chaos we live in 99% of the time. Chaos, you know, we don't go over any of this stuff, the good, bad, and indifferent of the world. It's an indifferent world at best, you know, to our feeling, you know, so.
And czars and whatnot, that's why they have mystics on their court, because they get to that point and realize every other tumbler, every other fact of life, I can control now except luck. I can't control luck. But if luck is supernatural, I will maybe hire somebody who can put in a word. But luck is not supernatural. Luck is just luck.
It's like the deathbed Catholics, you know what I mean? They won't have gone to mass all their life, but on their deathbed they'll be just in case, get the priest around for the last rites, you know. So it's kind of like an insurance policy, but the level of ignorance in public discourse is crazy.
Yes, the planet Mars. Astronauts to the planet Mars. Yes. In America, at least in this particular year, the ignorance in life works its way down.
I'm sitting here while you guys were talking, slowly forming my own conspiracy.
Well, they exist. I'm sure that there are Booktube conspiracy theories, right? There's got to be people who come to these channels. We all know each other in person, that we're coordinating with each other ahead of time.
People will be saying, what exactly is this OBG? And what have they done with Todd? Of course, you had to bring a case when Mark buys a house with a cellar.
The cellar is amazing too. It's not that old fireplace is something that, God, the history involved in just the fireplace with swinging hooks, the swinging metal hooks to lay kettles and cauldrons on. Just amazing.
You've got the crook arm on it now with the hooks and everything.
Yeah,
that's in his basement.
All the places here used to be like that. You still see them occasionally in older kind of houses that are restored and kept.
Right.
You'd have the bring in the pot to keep it on the boil and bring it out to simmer over the ashes and stuff. And have you got it like or anything like that?
So the front of it with the main oven, you've got that. Side, you've got the bread oven, and then below it the firebox.
Fantastic. Okay, well, you'll be okay in the zombie apocalypse. You can just retreat to the cellar.
Yeah. I wouldn't have done that in my last house. I had a cellar that made Stephen King scared.
He famously would not go into the cellar in the old farmhouse.
Now that I have you on live and chat, you made mention before you lived near Stephen King.
I lived about
Yeah.
So he lived on West Broadway in Bangor. There's a little bookstore. I lived on Pond Street on the edge. I could look at his house. And he did, I knew him when I had a bookstore there. And then I took a class from him before he was really famous. I've known him for years. I mean, he would know to say hi. I'm not his friend. Yeah.
Isn't it another funny coincidence how you had a bookstore, Mark? You worked in a bookstore, Steve. I've been in the book business. Sean Stanfast's had a bookstore. Like, I think a lot of our similarities come from being in those environments for years.
Yeah.
And our understanding of what books mean. It's a funny little thing. I only thought of it there.
Another similarity that I really like that isn't quite so common is that we've all stayed completely flexible. I think if you strip away all of the individual interests, each one of us would say what you said, which you have to like them. and if I like them, I'm not beholden to anybody to keep up an illusion. I don't have to have choices or anything like that. I can like anything I want. That's in people as old. That's kind of usually people have calcified. People who don't enjoy.
No. Yeah, we got to stay flexible. I see there's a big debate raging about the Booker at the moment. I'm so out of the whole Booker scene. I don't read, nothing wrong with it. I don't read a lot of literary fiction, but I can't for the life of me figure out how Hilary Mantel can write 2 parts of a trilogy that win a Booker, and the third part that was apparently very well received by critics and readers doesn't even make the shortlist.
Yeah.
Seems straight.
Yeah, it's because of politics.
Yeah, I don't pay
It
attention.
doesn't have anything to do with books anymore. If this weren't all about politics, then the shortlist wouldn't have 4 debut novels on it. The most prestigious literary prize in the world. And 4 debut novels. The very first time the author has ever tried it. Whereas you have a whole list of people, Matthew O'Farrell, Marilyn Robinson, Hilary Mantel, and a whole bunch of other people who don't make either the long list or the short list. What does that say? If you are a literary prize that is judging literary merit, and you have 4 debut novels short list, then what you're saying is craft and talent mean nothing. No author ever learns to do a better job than they did the first time out, and so you might as well not even try. And obviously no one is saying. The only other explanation, that's not the explanation, is that these novels just have authors. And it doesn't matter about the novel.
I think that great old world zeitgeist, books that are capturing a mood, even if it's just a perceived mood, tend to do well in these kind of competitions, I think. That's as an outsider looking in. I have no problem reading books that I've read many books that won the Booker Prize, but I don't make it my business to say read long lists or short lists or stuff like that. But I do watch videos of people who make it. It's interesting.
It is interesting, yeah. And I always find the video fascinating. When a booktuber decides, okay, I'm going to read everything on the long list, I always find those reactions. But aren't we coming up on the announcement of the Nobel for literature? Isn't that right around the corner? That's in the autumn, isn't it?
Who is the last lyricist? Led Zeppelin.
I don't think.
I think Bruce Springsteen should get it for Born to Run Alone. I love you with all the mad. Oh, one of the best lines ever.
The best thing to do to recover their good name would be to give it to Ngugi Pathian, who's been rooted for it and favored for it for decades. Probably the greatest living writer. He's still alive. He wrote a book just a few weeks ago, so he's active. He's not anyone lane. He's not anyone that where I'm going to look at the award and say, "Who the hell is that?" That's bad. If a bookish person can listen to the award winner for the Nobel Prize in Literature and say, "Who the hell is that?" That's bad. And that means you've done a bad job. And
I think it's as much about judges, these competitions. It's judges making a statement. It's not the books. And while I admire, and I do admire people who read the book, or I enjoy their videos, I couldn't enjoy reading a prescribed list of, say, 12 novels in a kind of 8-month or 6-month period. To me, it would make me want not to read them. If someone said, "Here's the long list, and you better get these under your belt in 6 months and have an opinion on every one of them," that terrifies me as a reader. I'm too old.
I wouldn't read my own list.
Yeah.
I make a list at the end of every year.
You do?
I do, yes. Oh. I've done it for decades. The year is spent first.
Did you know that? I never heard that in my whole life. No.
What was it, open pages or closed books? Some stuff he does online. I'm not sure. I can't remember what it was.
Is that the name of it? Fallen Bookshelf?
Definitive, because it doesn't enter into it. The year's politics enter into it. The bandwagon jumping doesn't enter into it. None of it does. Well,
all right, knock it off then.
But it makes Booktube interesting. If it was just all clones of me or you or Mark, it would get a bit boring fairly quickly. I love the similarities between us guys, for example. But I also enjoy the differences. Like, I would never read a romance novel, but I love the way you squeal in delight when you get a box of romance novels and you're open. You're like, the art. Look at the artwork is fantastic and everything. I just love the differences that are there in reading. I would never read as much maritime as you would, Mark, but I love you when you get something with maps and charts. You forget you're making a Booktube video. You're looking at it going, "Oh yeah, I better keep going on." So it takes all kinds.
It's a nice feeling because you have company when you're book shopping alone. Suddenly you have company, even when you're way down some book-lined aisle in some shop in the middle of nowhere. No one knows you're there, but you're not alone. You're seeing things that are not, but you're seeing things. And I have had it happen to me in bookstores where I look at something and I don't just think, that's weird enough so that Steve Partridge might be interested. Or that's boring enough so that David Murphy might like it. I don't just think that anymore. When I'm down that aisle now, I think that, and then I smile. Right there in the middle. Because of people that
I always say that when I do that, I would always say, "I know Sean D. Standfast already has that."
Yeah. It's like that the T.E. Lawrence I hauled the other day. And you left the comment for me going, I think you messaged me even, didn't you? You said, like, "Do you actually really like the book, or do you just like..." And I'm like, "No, of course I love the book. This is a brilliant book. It's one of the kind of key works of the 20th century. The prose in that book is phenomenal.
I liked it. I somehow missed that idea. Yeah. And Sean Standfast said that he had that same edition himself.
I don't have the dust.
I'll find you one. I'll put it on your pile.
That made me wonder, actually, talking about that book with you and with Sean made me wonder what the master list would be if all of us older booktubers got together and decided on a list of the books that we consider not only important, but really enjoyable.
collected works of Jacqueline Suzanne.
The
complete works of Harold Robbins.
The
The Giants.
Louis L'Amour Western Library.
We've seen it already,
Yeah.
even in this chat. All three of us agree on Patrick O'Brien.
Oh, yeah.
We don't just say, we don't just venerate him because, oh yeah, you have to renovate him. We like him, genuinely like his books. I wonder what
love reading.
I wonder if there'd be any classics on canonical classics.
Only if there was a formula where we could get together as judges and come up with a list. And then we could whittle it down to a short list, Steve. I don't know.
He prize.
The old man Booker?
The old man Booker.
I put out a call earlier today for questions and discussion topics, and a couple of them, I got bummed. I feel a little bad that we're not touching them because people went to the bother of sending them in, but a couple of those were about what Booker Prize books we would nominate, which ones we've been nominated that we liked. And I thought that's really not going to go anywhere because we don't organize our reading around prizes. So
I kind of start and finish at Hilary Mantel because it's so glaring. The rest of them, I have no idea. And like, I didn't do Wolf Hall. I read Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. And it just didn't work for me as historical fiction. And I like my historical fiction. And it wasn't the story. The story was great. It wasn't the plotting. It just didn't, in that simplistic way, I kind of went, nah, instead of, yeah, you know.
Oh, Claudius. We all read right? You just hauled Claudius?
Claudius, yeah. Claudius, yeah.
But what is the reason why Wolf Hall books didn't do it for you? Was it the anachronism, the way they read like modern? They don't read like historical fiction.
You know,
because what you said is right. No way to fault them technically.
No, I couldn't fault them. And so many readers I know in real life, not just on Booktube, have said these are phenomenal works. And because I do read quite a bit of historical fiction in my fiction reading, it just didn't work for me, and that's about all I can say, you know. And sure, like, isn't that just the joy of it, you know? I can read like the collected short stories of Aleister Crowley over and over and over again. No one else is going to.
And
no one else.
You said you're enjoying Dan Simmons? The Hyperion book?
Yeah, Hyperion and the second in the Cantos I'm enjoying. I really enjoyed Hyperion. I thought it was very well written. I thought the ideas in it were fantastic. I liked the science fiction in it. Quite a modern take on science fiction. It wasn't hard science fiction. It wasn't space opera. It was something newer, I think. Even though it's like 20 years old, there was a kind of philosophical science fiction.
Yes, philosophical science fiction. Great heyday, right around. That was around the same time that Fire Upon the Deep came out, and Robert Silverberg wrote a book in that vein called A Face on the Waters that is out of print, but like anything else he's ever written.
Silverberg was
yeah. I mean, he's written his whole life, but for every two duds, there's been a terrific book. Although apparently not. One of his books didn't go over well in David Murphy's household. Up the Line did not go over well. He thought it was too weird.
David is a great reader. He's a very curious reader, David Murphy.
Yeah.
Because when I hear him talk about his econ books and stuff, he is so well versed in his subject. Like, he's quoting papers that he's read, footnotes that he's read, and he brings that when he does. He done that read along of Richard Evans's The Rise of the Third Reich, which I thought was a good book. I had read it, but he done this read along and he was pulling stuff out of it. I was going, God, I felt like I hadn't read the book at all, you know. But then he'll read a romance or he'll read a western or something and do a Louis L'Amour, and he'll be effusive about it, and that's to me that's the mark of a reader. It's just a reader's reader. Try anything.
Yes.
Yeah, give it a go.
Clean this up in post-op.
But
Okay. This is fun.